Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hunter Apparel podcast. My name is Simon Hunter, and I am the CEO of Hunter Apparel Solutions Limited. Today, my colleague and friend Chris Colgan is with me. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, really excited to be here today and have this introduction chat about our journey together and what we've been doing in the world of health and safety and all things PPE. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Chris, time flies. When exactly was it that we first encountered each other?
Interesting one. This was when our paths crossed, albeit we didn't probably meet face to face because it was during the pandemic.
March 20, I would say, March 2020. And I do remember this, and I asked at the time, with being the provider for the UK Fire Services COVID PPE supplies, and never having met you at the time, your team basically mobilised that meeting. This was right at the start of people even getting familiar with Teams, and you made a very emotional speech. Actually, I remember some of my staff being incredibly moved. It was a time of great sensitivity. People were afraid. Our policy at Hunter was, I had sort of said to our staff, our purpose is to serve this sector. My pledge is to keep you safe, and I want you at work helping me deliver our mission, deliver our purpose. Essentially, you made a speech that talked about, this was a moment in time, an important moment in time, and where were you when this was happening? Almost like were we in what Elvis died kind of moment. And I do remember some of the staff being very, very moved by that, and I personally was incredibly impressed by the way you spoke and mobilised your troops and ours for the common goods. And I don't know, what was your kind of memory or thought about those times?
Oh, those times they were incredible. They were really, well, for me, it was I'd just taken on a new role as Director of Operations, so Assistant Chief in Kent Fire Rescue Service.
So how long were you in the role at that point?
In the role, literally months.
Okay.
I mean, I've been with the service all my career. I joined in '89, but yeah, I joined in '89 with the traditional yellow leggings, black tuning, called young. I lived in Kent, I served right away through Kent. And so I just got to what I thought was the pinnacle of my career. Director of Operations, Assistant Chief, all these grand titles. And the work we were doing, for those that are not familiar, Fire Rescue Services normally have a national reference. And our national reference was PPE clothing came. And so I worked with a brilliant team, fantastic team. But I worked with a great team on PPE, and then we were asked by the NFCC to turn our hand to medical grade PPE. And then they're thinking, have I got the capacity to do this? Because, I'm just taking on a new job. And someone told me once about when you take on a new job, it's really, really quite insightful. It's like a balloon. In the first few weeks and months of that job, you ever try blowing up a new balloon? It's got a lot of resistance, but then you learn to flex and get this capacity as the balloon's been blown up and down a few times. And that's a good analogy about when you step into a new role.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, well, this balloon hasn't been inflated, I'm hoping that it gets easier, or I can take on the capacity of a new role where, in fact, it's the most senior uniformed officer and also take on a national thing. Yeah. So, and you can't do that unless you are surrounded by really good people, really people. And I was very fortunate. You're only as good as your team, they say it's true. Remember, before I did have the choice of saying, do you want to do this? And I was thinking, what to do it? You got to step up. One of my stipulations was I want to know who's around me. And at that point, I didn't know you guys, but because I had good people around me, they made the connections with you and your company and showed really good judgment. And so that excellent team just grew. And so, my memories towards your first question about those times was, this is testing. We don't know what's around the corner. And soon become very reliant on what my team were doing and what your team were doing, and work to work in that. And it really was a case of devolve, trust, give strategic direction. And then you mentioned that. I don't think it was in teams. I think it was just we was in our boardroom in Rochester, and you guys were in your boardroom, and it was just a tower, an audio tower. And I was asked to come in and just introduce myself and have a chat, which is what I did. I remember talking about, the importance of what you were doing, and hopefully it did resonate.
It definitely did. And, I equally was incredibly proud of the people that I was working with in our team, because the core of that team, made a commitment, made a promise to the fire service that we would deliver on a national emergency, and 14 to 18 hour days, 7 days a week, 4 months, Easter flicked by with no rest. And it was hard on a lot of us, and but also, it really felt very, very meaningful. I mean, we talk about our purpose in the company, and at that moment we were absolutely living our purpose. I felt that it was transformative for some of our staff, because sometimes you think people are maybe bought into a message, and maybe the variability of that's significant, but I think at that moment when we stepped up, people internally kind of really felt and believed in that sort of central message of our reason to exist as a company. It's just a period of time I'm never going to forget.
Yeah.
And then we got through that, and we, like every other player in the marketplace to some extent, had this mountainous stock of PPE that nobody wanted, and that brought us some challenges at the time for us and maybe competitors.
I remember, what's been really nice is, since we've gone on to work together more closely and actually get to meet face to face, and understand that we've got a shared common understanding of where things should move to. But what's been really nice for me is, when we've reflected back on our individual stories about that period, and as they were very similar, when you sitting there, you said, on your sofa at home thinking, we're doing the right thing here, and Roisin, me, your wife, saying, Simon, are you sure about this? And I said, well, at the same time, I was sat there at home looking at certificates of conformity. There was one weekend where I needed to do some of that as well, because there was all hands to the pump. I remember sitting there on my laptop at home, looking at certificates of conformity that had come in. You guys had said, well, look, we've got this stock here, we want to change, right? And we were doing our own due diligence, and we wanted to make sure we weren't buying counterfeit goods. I remember reading all these different certificates of conformity and trying to identify if it was the same tester. So we was reading Chinese names, and my wife didn't ask me. She didn't ask me. What are you doing? And the person on the other end who was helping me was also, I've got one with that name, but we were trying to pronounce these names. When did I go from joining the fire service, joining the fire brigade, going on a truck, putting out fires, to sitting there in this surreal environment in your own home, reading certificates? It was almost like
the colossal claim ratio.
Saying, and then in the end, not being 100% sure whether it was right or not. Let's take a bit of a gamble, going, then we'll time, we're going to miss this slot for you.
I remember all too well, again, sitting on the sofa with my wife and seeing on the news planes coming in and being quarantined, and the PPE was all wrong, and just the big concern that we had to do the right thing. We worked terribly hard at it, both sides of the table, to make everything right. That's 6 months, so to some extent a year, without any significant hitches, which was great. And then obviously we were working with your team, and we had no real contact with you after, what's a very distinguished career. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was strange really. I I never thought, in my early career, I learned first job, you think, oh, well, I can retire at this young age and I'm going to go off and do all other things. And I used to question why officers, especially the senior officers, when they were leaving, why they then went on and did other things. I'm thinking, you've got a lovely pension, you've got the work in front of you, just go out and enjoy your time.
It's brilliant. As I got nearer and nearer to retirement, my views changed. I started to have similar views that
Energy services, it does define you. And so you felt like you were adding something all the time, and the more strategic you are, I used to get a buzz out of setting strategic direction. And whereas in my early career I was very much a detail person, I became less and less detailed and more focused on broad strategic direction. Right, let's go that way. I want you to get to there. How you get to there is, you've got freedom to flex and do that yourself. Like you said, motivation to do it.
I think it's one of those things you often hear people saying that this is a very male thing. I don't really think that's the case. I think that it's not really to do with being a male or a female. It's just to do with a type of personality type that is so committed to their job that their entire identity is wrapped up in the job. And I don't really think it's a male thing as such.
Yeah, it does. And I look back, definitely my job defined me. When I was at work, I lived and breathed. And then when I was at home, especially in more senior positions, I was always thinking about tomorrow. So then, of course, you feel like you're adding value, especially having just been through something like the pandemic that we've just been talking about. So when it actually comes to, well, now it's time to move on, and you start to get senses of that, because actually, throughout your career, you see people that are resisting new things, resisting change, are most motivating, and eventually they identify, and again, another colleague. That's the beauty of the fire service. You go through, you meet so many good people that are older and wiser than you, and they've been through it, and they give you snippets. And one of my friends said to me, "Did you know it's time to go?" Then I found myself becoming that person that was resisting, and I think, I started to identify myself in that. And so you think, no, it's time to move on and do new things, but. I've never been one of those people who just sit and do nothing. But I didn't think I would throw myself into anything fire related. But actually, you've heard me say this many times, the one thing that you get from retirement is a time to think. And you have that more space. And when I was doing the original role, plus the national role from the PPE, and you can't devote frame time to all of those things to the level you would like. And so you find yourself doing the best you can, but spreading yourself very thinly.
Yeah, very similar to a CEO. Yeah, so you've got a no matter how long a day you've been in, you've got a limited amount of time to spread yourself across a wide plethora of topics. Change and resistance is change, and we're in an era where the only guarantee is change, and the change will just be constant and ongoing. And so in a career like that, it's really just the same. You've got to trust the people that you've got in expert positions. You've got to empower people, and you've got to be careful with your time.
And what I found was, actually, when I started talking, when we met in person, I think it was in 22, started talking about, what we think the fire service should look like. I started to realise I've still got a lot of experience and a lot of views that may be helpful to those people that are in the whole seat now. So I desperately want that to come across loud and clear. It is hindsight, but it's not hindsight in a patronising way. It's, do you know what? I made a lot of mistakes, and if I had my time again, I would have done things differently. And actually, you're probably going to make similar mistakes because you're in the same environment. And you have got time to think, and you are in your role, spreading yourself extremely thinly. So if I can just give a little bit back, about those that we can't see now, say, no, do you know what, I make this as well. So that's it's a new thing that's giving me renewed energy. So, yeah, left the fire service. Don't like to say I'm retired, I'd like to say I'm coming into land. So this is a gradual, because you don't want to lift face, I'm coming into land. But it's nice because I'm still talking about something that's been a big part of my life. And with a son in the job as well, to say your son's in your family-orientated business, which is brilliant. And so there is an incentive for me as well, you know. And if I can help him a little bit, so because oh yeah, you're Chris's son, yeah, immediately they know who it is. I think he handles that pretty well because he's his own man, you know, have his own film and do his own thing. But it does make you invested still in the service, especially around this whole issue around contaminants and carcinogens, health versus safety, and all those things, and perhaps turning that spotlight more on the health aspects, which I'll probably go on to talk about.
That is something that resonated strongly with me. You know, as sort of it's easy to sort of split that term out, health and safety, and you know, that was very much what I found in my career. People would say health and safety, and really just mean safety, you know, and you know, and I suppose just as my awareness of that fact grew, it just made me very, very curious about that part of the equation, and I suppose that's really become a very focal part of my working life, and the purpose within this company to try and not just protect and make safe the people that wear our uniforms at M.B.E, but also to try and have an eye for the sort of the long-term health outcomes that can be related to jobs that carry lots and lots of risk. You know, I remember being at a conference and seeing a video, and someone was sort of mapping contamination spread at a fireground. So it was a terrace houses, structural fire, you know, really going. It was flames would go. All three first response teams land there or thereabout several times. And okay, the firefighters are entering the building first and penetrating deepest into that structure, and of course get contamination. You know, at the front door, you know, sort of bailing people out of the house. You know, the paramedics are straight in. You know, contamination all over these rescued individuals, and the firefighters that's now spreading onto stretchers, onto the paramedics. Cops are coming in close to the scene, and of course there's, you know, contamination buffeting out of the house, much of which you can't even see. So in reality, you know that our journey has mostly focused in this respect, but contamination spread and potential impact on blue-light workers, around firefighters. But of course, it's not just the firefighters; it's also the paramedics, it's also police officers that are getting affected. And yeah, I suppose when we spoke after you retired, I remember you sort of coming to land. Can you come into land? But so when you were coming into land and when we're chatting, I do remember you saying, "Look, I'm in a comfortable position, and you know, if I do something, I want it to be." I remember you said, "I want to sort of something gives me energy, and is it I felt you guys and something out of interest." And that's sort of when I suggested to you, well, are you aware of this whole world of contamination, the agent spread, long-term disease of firefighters, the absolute limitations of water-based washing?
You remember significant points. You know, I've done a bit of coaching in the past, and what I found is you can't impart your light bulb moment on somebody else. They've got to experience it themselves, and then they don't have to think to remember it. That light bulb moment is then kind of and you gave me that light bulb moment when we were talking about this whole topic. And I never, do you know what? 30 odd years in the job, and I hadn't made that distinction between health and safety. I'd use that phrase all the time, and it's when you pointed it out, what we're really talking about, and you said shooting injury on fire, and it that light bulb come on. And that's why I continually shown that point out, just saying, you're dead right. We don't focus on non-latency disease. And our very good friend and colleague John Cairns, and then given me a great statistic about for every one person that receives an acute injury, 99 suffer long-latency disease. Well, that puts it in perspective. So I do think the culture within the fire services is very much ingrained in health and safety. They have to comply with the Health and Safety at Work Act. When you talk about health and safety, they are thinking, I was definitely thinking acutely. And what a perverse irony that the very kid that you give to keep them safe for that acute injury is actually causing that incident you talked about where the three emergency services were all getting exposed. That would have always been termed a bread and butter job. That's a bread and butter job. We almost were indoctrinated into the service thinking smoke is part of your career now. It's not, almost it's not hazardous. However, the really strange thing is if you went to the general office because you got a shower and it said chemical job, what a different approach you got from that, just that chemical incident. Sandbag, septic incident that used to spark a very prescriptive set of procedures. Uphill, stable ground, decontamination area. And it's only now that we're starting to see that same philosophy being put in for fires. So really interesting times and lots of, but I don't think, you talked about decontamination and the LCO₂, which we're going to talk about, but it is such a vast topic and it's such a difficult one for fire service leaders to deal with. Because it's not just about the PPE and decontamination. It's about our firefighting tactics and that's the views that I think we're super urgent by. That's that, again, you talk about how you're defining your career. Within that career, you would define as a good or bad firefighter by the way you walk. It's even turned a breathing apparatus course. So you go there for 2 weeks to learn how to wear breathing apparatus. As long as you really think about it, it's not a BA course, it's not a breathing apparatus course, it's search and leisure course. BA is merely the PPE that you wear to enable you to do it. So I think there needs to be a shift because although BA is fundamentally the good thing in terms of protecting firefighters' health, you could argue it's part of the problem because we're preoccupied with getting in there and putting fire out, and there should be more focus on offensive external attack, not exposing firefighters to doing that. That's difficult because that's the bit they join for. That's the bit that excites them, getting rigged en route and things like that. And there's all other things that we could go in and talk about if we had more time. But so it's a broad arena that's got to be focused on in terms of how do we improve.
Cairns, who, as it happens, has been a very inspirational mentor to me, and so I'm proud to know. John is very much, he's sort of a legend of the PPE sector. I don't think you'll mind me saying, but I think he's 50 years in the game. So there's not too much that John hasn't seen and knows, and it's great John's imparting his lifetime of knowledge in PPE and the related issues around health to Hunter staff, folks in their 20s, they've come through college and sort of monthly sessions with him, with various EM standards and stuff. And what was important is knowledge, and he's great at it. But I sort of see, John sort of sits within a kind of a community now that you can feel as a kind of an active organism almost. There was a point in time when, if I was talking about these issues of firefighter cancer and stuff, I really felt the sector did not want to engage, did not want to acknowledge it. And I remember being quite young and someone saying, you're fear-mongering here. And I didn't feel that was true. And, I think things have moved on very, very substantively. And part of that is this kind of community. You've got, people like John Lord, who's sort of a champion for raising awareness. Stevie Robbie Byrne is very much in that sort of area of raising awareness of firefighter cancer and what's the sort of impacts on life, and seeing really emotional engagements with those films, talking about their life in a unbelievably open way, and you could not fail to be moved by listening to those guys, or other folks in a sort of wider environment. The Wakefield with the Firefighter podcast, that's a great kind of vehicle, I guess, for I suppose what wider things are in the fire service than perhaps we would focus on in this podcast, but nonetheless getting a message out, interviewing some of these people that are kind of committing their lives just to a great extent, and sort of trying to move things forward in a positive way, trying to make some sort of societal contribution in terms of, here's what we've learned, here's the data that we've got, here's the operational or lived experience that we've got, trying to spread that to a wider audience. It's been a bit of a ride.
Yeah, it's definitely. I agree with you. I definitely feel like there's a movement now, and fire. I mean, when I was in the role, and I was aware of the contaminants. I remember him saying, "We've got this issue that's arising around contaminants," and again, I've got 5% more time to think about this. What's the issue? Well, we haven't really know what the answer is. I mean, this was way back. And then we had one of our officers so we tried to do our little bit, but I remember I probably put it in the all too difficult to solve part. And that's where I do reflect back, and I use that term willful blindness. I think I was guilty of willful blindness because I knew there was a problem, but I didn't focus as much time as I would do in hindsight now on that problem. Willful blindness is a legal term. It's when you disregard or ignore information that you know or should know. You had every reason to know about it. And disregard that because you are, your mind's distracted into what you deem more pressing priorities. And that's probably the case. I was probably being distracted by so many other things. And this whole thing about cancer, that's old people, isn't it? That happened when you're old, and sort of in the 70s, 80s and that. And sort of
That all changed really in, I think it was June 2022, when the World Health Organization, through their subcommittee, the IARC, and that was a bit of a moment, particularly for people that are kind of involved in this community or have a enhanced awareness of the situation, let's say, for whatever reason, or it's both experience with cancer, or it's operational experience, like someone like me that's we're building a care mental facility along today's wall, a decontamination centre as well. But from that moment, I think there was a bit of a gear shift. People's awareness started to change. Maybe the focus on health and safety at that point really started to pivot a bit.
Yeah.
At least in an embryonic way, I would say, towards more of the health conversation, and we were focused on it.
And it's not just within this arena. I mean, give fire service credit in terms of, preoccupied with acute injury, but that's because people going into dangerous environments, they had to focus on that.
Yeah.
But, okay, to give credit to the fire rescue service, they did shift in terms of health, in terms of mental health. So not now within fire rescue service, around supporting people, it's almost, especially around suicide and things like that.
Yeah, it's very
stress,
stressful.
depression. They really have moved a long way there. And I think you're right now, just behind that, and it's gaining momentum, is this whole thing around health, physical, mental health, not only mental health, but also your physical health. The bit I think where it needs to have, I mean, because you mentioned to John Lord, really powerful stories and lived experience, and are committing, to the cause of pushing that agenda, consistently pushing it. That certainly defines them, because they are so committed to it. Will certainly resonate with people who talk about lived experience or the agenda. I don't want this to happen to you, but it soon then needs to be followed up with actually embed that and then change. The fire service is very prescriptive. too prescriptive in my view in lots of things. I understand why it's prescriptive. Got someone on call, your call handlers, your control operators need to get the right information in the card. So you need those prompts and those lists. But that description then runs throughout the entire service. I remember, you going to the station and it's always, what do we do today? Well, the routine, but it tells you it's always 9 o'clock, you've got to do this that routine. No, it's 10 o'clock, you lock in the bays. Bays don't need locking, no fine. No, 10 o'clock, you lock the bay. Very prescriptive inputs, rather than, my favourite talking about outcomes. So it was very much focused on that. And I think there's room for us to work more with self-efficacy rather than with a prescriptive nature. And trouble is, procedures are ingrained through prescription, and so you want to change those. You want us to do something different. But on my training course, I was taught this. Okay, that's probably been watered down and changed a little bit by the socialisation that goes on when you go onto station. And the older hands say, no, forget that. This is how we really do it. And so, you come out of a training centre at this standard. You probably learn some good experiential things from more experienced people, but you probably learn some bad practices as well. And so it's very difficult, from the point of trying to make long-winded points, it's very difficult to change those ingrained behaviours. And so something around, not putting your gloves in the helmets, after a jog, someone you service a breathe that way, friendly camp policy, all of those things, adopting those sensible approaches.
Sort of thinking, hopefully, as a consequence of doing this podcast with me today, you'll get to connect with all your prior colleagues in a kind of a way in campfire service, and they'll hopefully sort of hear sort of some of your views, but sort of along the other side of the job.
So I was from the other side, they're probably going, I'm not completely not again about those things before we go away from that.
But thank you, Chris, for joining me today. I know we sort of planned this as a sort of a two-part conversation. These issues that I know were just as important to you as important to me.
Well, thanks so much. I've enjoyed talking to you again.
Thank you, brother.
Look forward to the next.
Thank you, folks.